She did not walk down the aisle. She marched, jaw set, hands cold, the white dress her mother had sewn by lamplight, already stained at the hem from where she had fallen getting out of the car. At the far end of the cathedral, a man stood waiting who had never once asked for her hand. He had simply informed her family that the debt was due. Isabella Whitmore looked at Damien Moretti and understood with bone-deep clarity that the most dangerous thing in that room was not his reputation, his money, or the armed men positioned at every exit. It was the fact that he felt absolutely nothing looking back at her. If you have ever loved someone who treated you like a transaction, stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Isabella Whitmore was supposed to get married, she threw up twice in a gas station bathroom off Route 9 and told herself it was nerves. It wasn't nerves. She knew that. Her body knew that. The cracked mirror above the sink gave her back a face she barely recognized, pale, eyes red-rimmed from a night that had involved no sleep and too much honesty. She splashed water on her cheeks, gripped the edge of the basin, and looked at herself the way a person looks at something they have already decided to sacrifice. She was 26 years old. She had not chosen this. Behind her, through the thin wall, she could hear her father on the phone. His voice was the low, broken kind. The voice a man uses when he has been humiliated so thoroughly that even anger costs too much energy. Thomas Whitmore had always been a proud man. Broad-shouldered, slow-laughing, the kind of father who fixed fences in the rain and never complained. But the man on the other side of that wall was not that man anymore. The ranch had done something to him. The debt had done something worse. Isabella dried her face with a paper towel that disintegrated against her skin. She opened the door. Thomas looked up. He was sitting on the hood of the truck, still in his church clothes, the phone pressed flat against his thigh. He had the look of someone who had just been told they could stop drowning, but only if they handed over their child to the current. "We should go," he said. "I know." "Isabella, don't." She walked past him and pulled open the passenger door. "Just drive, Dad." He didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. They both understood the shape of what this day was. Willowmere Ranch had been in the Whitmore family for 3 generations. 47 acres of working land outside Harrowfield, Illinois, horses, hayfields, a barn that listed slightly to the east that her grandfather had built with his own hands. Isabella had grown up running barefoot across that property. She knew every fence post, every stubborn gate latch, every patch of ground that turned to mud in April. She knew where the barn owls nested and which horse spooked at thunder, and the exact sound the wind made moving through the cottonwoods along the eastern fence line at dusk. She was about to trade all of that, not for love, not for adventure, not for any reason that would ever make sense to someone who hadn't watched their father stop sleeping, stop eating, start flinching every time a vehicle slowed down at the end of the drive. The Whitmore debt to the Moretti organization had started small, a loan secured through a Moretti-affiliated property company when the drought hit 2 years ago and the bank had already said no twice. Thomas hadn't fully understood who he was borrowing from, or maybe he had, and desperation had made that fact negotiable in his mind. Either way, the interest had compounded in ways that were never explained clearly up front, and by the time Thomas understood the true structure of what he owed, the number had become a different kind of weight entirely. One that didn't come from banks, one that sent quiet men in clean cars. The arrangement had been presented not as a threat, but as a solution. That was how these things always worked, dressed up, reasonable sounding, the violence implicit rather than stated. A marriage, a formal merger of the Whitmore name into the Moretti household, the debt retired, the ranch protected, the family left alone. All it cost was Isabella. The cathedral was on the north side of the city, and Isabella had never been inside it before today. It was the kind of building designed to make ordinary people feel small. Vaulted ceilings, stone columns, light coming through high windows and thick shafts. It smelled like cold marble and money, and something faintly chemical, like flowers that had been kept alive past their natural end. There were perhaps 200 people seated in the pews. Isabella did not know a single one of them. She stood in the vestibule with her father and 2 of Moretti's associates, Men who did not introduce themselves but positioned themselves on either side of the entrance with the practiced stillness of people who had done this kind of thing before. Not weddings specifically, just the general business of making sure people went where they were supposed to go. Thomas squeezed her hand. She felt the tremor in his grip. He was trying to hold himself together for her sake, and the effort of that, the visible, heartbreaking effort of it, was the thing that finally made her eyes sting. "You don't have to," he said. The words were quiet and completely hollow. They both knew she did. "I know what I'm doing," she said. She didn't. But she stepped forward anyway. The walk down that aisle was the longest thing Isabella had ever done. The music playing was orchestral and expensive and entirely wrong for the occasion. Something written for joy, played at a funeral. She kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and she did not look at the faces watching her from either side, because she understood that those faces belonged to a world she was entering whether she wanted to or not, and looking at them directly felt like acknowledging the bars of the cage. Damien Moretti stood at the altar. She had seen photographs. You couldn't exist within 50 miles of Harrowfield without having heard the name, and the internet filled in the rest. But photographs were flat, and the man in front of her was not. He was tall, 6'2", maybe more, with the kind of physical presence that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the way he occupied space, like the air rearranged itself around him rather than the other way around. Dark suit, no tie. Dark hair worn short, a jaw that looked like something you could break your hand on. His eyes were the problem. They were dark and entirely still, and when they found her coming down the aisle, they did not warm. They did not soften. They assessed her the way you assess a thing that is arriving, checking condition, checking value, logging the information without reaction. Isabella held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to reach him. Then she looked at the officiant. The ceremony was brief. Someone had written vows that sounded like vows, but nothing about the exchange was ceremonial in any real sense. It was contractual. Damien spoke his lines in a voice that was low and measured and utterly uninflected, like a man signing a document out loud. When it was Isabella's turn, she said the words clearly and without trembling, because she had decided in the gas station bathroom that the one thing she was going to keep in this entire situation was her composure. When he slid the ring onto her finger, his hand was steady and cool. When the officiant pronounced them married, Damien turned to face her, and for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it. It was gone before she could. He did not kiss her. He simply turned and walked back up the aisle, and Isabella understood that she was expected to follow. So she followed. The reception was held in a private dining room at a hotel 11 floors above the city, and it lasted 3 hours that Isabella spent largely in the company of Clara Bennett, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and an apron she had somehow forgotten to remove, who turned out to be the head of household staff at the Moretti estate, and who had apparently been sent to keep Isabella company when it became clear that Damien's version of husbandly attention involved standing at the far end of the room talking to men Isabella suspected were not discussing anything she'd want to know about. Clara was direct in the way of women who had worked hard their whole lives and had no patience left for pretense. "He's not cruel," Clara said, handing Isabella a glass of water. "I want you to know that. People think, because of what they hear, they think a certain kind of man is a certain kind of man all the way through. He's not. He's complicated." "That's a generous word," Isabella said. Clara looked at her steadily. "I've worked in that house for 11 years. I've seen things go in ways they shouldn't, and I've seen him make decisions that protected people who had no reason to expect protection." She paused. "I'm not saying tonight is going to be easy. I'm saying there's more there than what you saw at that altar." Isabella said nothing. She drank the water. The estate was 40 minutes outside the city, through a stretch of land that grew progressively darker and quieter until the car turned through a gate and Isabella had her first view of what was going to be her home. It was large in the way that suggested several different architects across several different decades had all contributed their own ideas without speaking to each other. Stone and glass and iron, grounds that extended in every direction into darkness, floodlights along the drive that made the whole approach feel like arriving at something that needed to be secured. Damien had ridden separately. He was already inside when Clara led Isabella through the front entrance. The interior was cold. Not in temperature. The heating worked, the rooms were warm, but in the way spaces feel when they have been maintained without being inhabited. Everything was expensive, and everything was impeccable, and nothing had been loved. Damien was in the main hall when Clara brought Isabella through. He was still in his suit jacket, a glass of something amber in his hand, and he was looking at his phone with the expression of a man who had already moved on to the next item on his agenda. He looked up when they came in. "Clara, that's enough for tonight." Clara gave Isabella a look that contained a small amount of apology and a larger amount of steadying encouragement, then disappeared through a side corridor. Isabella stood in the center of the hall. Damien studied her for a moment. Then he set his glass down on a side table. "The East Wing has been prepared for you," he said. "You'll have your own bedroom, your own bathroom, a sitting room. Staff will bring whatever you need." "Okay," Isabella said. "There are rules." He said it without inflection, the way you would state a fact about weather. "You don't discuss what happens in this house with people outside it. You don't access areas that are off limits. Clara will identify them. When I have guests, I'll let you know whether your presence is expected or not. When I don't, I understand," Isabella said. He stopped. She met his eyes. "I'm not going to ask you questions about your business. I'm not going to make scenes. I'm not going to pretend this is something it isn't." She kept her voice even. "But I also want you to understand something." He said nothing. He waited. "I agreed to this for my family, not for you. I don't know you, and right now I don't particularly want to." She paused. "But I'm not going to disappear into this house and become invisible just because that would be more convenient for you. I exist. That's not going to change." Something happened in his face, not warmth exactly, more like the slight recalibration of a man encountering a variable he hadn't accounted for. "That's fine," he said. "Good. My name protects your family from tonight forward. The ranch is secure, the debt is retired." He held her gaze. "You'll want for nothing materially." "I already told you that's not what this is about for me." "I know." He picked up his glass again. "I'm telling you anyway." He walked toward the corridor that led, she would learn later, to his own wing of the house. He stopped once, without turning around. "The room has been prepared with flowers. I didn't choose them. Clara thought it was appropriate." He paused. "If they bother you, have them removed." Then he was gone. Isabella stood alone in the center of that immense, cold, beautiful hall, still in her wedding dress, and breathed in, out. The flowers in her room were white roses, and they smelled like something being kept alive past their natural end, and she left every one of them exactly where they were and did not sleep until nearly 4 in the morning, lying on her back staring at a ceiling she did not recognize, listening to a house that was entirely silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat, reminding her that she was still here, still herself. That was the first night. By the end of the first week, she understood the geography of the estate well enough to move through it without getting lost. By the end of the second, she had mapped the emotional geography of the place, which was harder, more irregular, and in certain respects more dangerous. She learned which staff members were guarded and which were genuinely warm. She learned that the kitchen ran on Clara's schedule and that the garden had been neglected for at least 2 growing seasons. She learned that Damien rose early, worked late, and ate most meals in his office, and that his presence in any shared space, the main dining room, the library, the back terrace, was irregular enough to be unpredictable. She did not see him often. When she did, they were polite to each other in the way of people sharing a space under a formal arrangement. He asked occasionally whether she needed anything. She said she was fine. He nodded and moved on. It was not cruelty. It was worse than cruelty in some ways. It was indifference. The practiced, self-contained remove of a man who had decided long ago that other people's inner lives were not his concern. Isabella started working in the garden on the 12th day, not because anyone asked her to, but because the sight of it, overgrown, ignored, genuinely lovely bones buried under 2 years of neglect, bothered her in a way she couldn't rationalize away. She asked Clara where the tools were kept. Clara's expression when she showed her was complicated enough to make Isabella suspect she was the first person in a long time to ask. She spent 4 hours pulling weeds and cutting back dead growth and discovering under the mess the remnants of what had once been an herb garden along the south wall. Rosemary, thyme, sage, surviving barely, stubborn in the way of things that have made their peace with being forgotten. She was still working when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Damien stood at the edge of the garden path. He had his jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was looking at what she was doing with an expression she could not read at all. "This was Elena's," he said. She waited. "She planted it when she first came here. My mother." He looked at the rosemary. "She's been gone for 8 years." Isabella looked down at her hands, dirty, scratched from the dead thorns she'd been pulling out. She looked back up. "I'll be careful with it," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, and Isabella went back to work, and neither of them said anything else. But that night, for the first time, she noticed that the light in his office stayed on later than usual, and she found herself wondering, against her better judgment, what exactly he was thinking about. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself a lot of things in those early weeks that she was less and less sure she believed. Because on a Thursday evening in her 3rd week at the estate, she came around the corner of the main hall corridor and very nearly walked directly into Damien, who was coming the other direction with a phone pressed to his ear and an expression on his face that she had never seen before. Raw. Briefly, completely unguarded. The face of a man who had received news that had stripped away every carefully maintained layer. He stopped short. The expression closed over immediately. A shutter coming down, fast and practiced. But she had seen it. He lowered the phone. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "It's fine." His voice was controlled again, level. She could have kept walking. She almost did. "Are you all right?" she said instead. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. The same thing she had noticed at the altar. That brief flicker of something she couldn't name. "That's not something you need to concern yourself with," he said. It wasn't said cruelly. It was said the way a man says something true about his own habits, because he has lived inside them so long he can't see the outside anymore. "I wasn't asking because I thought I needed to," Isabella said. "I asked because you looked like someone who needed to be asked." He was quiet for a long moment. "Go to bed, Isabella," he said finally. She held his gaze for exactly one more second. Then she turned and walked to her room, and she lay in the dark again, and she thought about the garden his mother had planted, and the expression on his face in the hallway, and the 8 years of silence in a house that used to be someone's home. And she understood with quiet, exhausted certainty that whatever she had walked into when she put on that white dress was not simple. It was not safe. And the most dangerous part of it, she was beginning to realize, was not Damien's world. It was the fact that she was already starting to see him. Not the name, not the reputation, not the cold, controlled presence at the altar. Him. The real version. Brief, flickering, there and gone before you could be sure you'd seen it at all. She pressed her palms flat against the mattress and stared at the ceiling. 3 weeks in. And somewhere down the corridor, in a house that had been empty of warmth for 8 years, a light was still on. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. And the next morning, when she came down to the kitchen and found a single cup of coffee already prepared, made the way she took it, black with half a spoon of sugar, the way Clara had seen her make it exactly once, sitting on the counter with no one nearby to explain how it had gotten there, Isabella Whitmore stood very still in the silence of that kitchen and felt the first thread of something she absolutely could not afford begin to pull loose. The coffee became a pattern. Isabella did not acknowledge it. Damien did not explain it. It simply existed. Every morning, on the kitchen counter, prepared correctly, sitting there when she came downstairs as though it had always been part of the house's rhythm. Clara, when Isabella looked at her directly on the 3rd morning it appeared, just picked up a dish towel and found something urgent to do on the other side of the kitchen. Isabella drank the coffee. She said nothing. She went out to the garden. That was how it started. Not with words, not with any kind of declaration, but with the slow, almost imperceptible accumulation of small things that neither of them was willing to name. She kept working the south garden. The herb beds came back faster than she expected. Rosemary was stubborn that way, and the sage had root systems that went deep enough to survive genuine neglect. She transplanted a section of dead growth, turned the soil along the back wall, found a cache of clay pots stacked against the stone that were cracked but usable if you weren't precious about appearances. She wasn't precious about anything anymore. That felt like the one useful thing the last month had done for her. On a Tuesday in her 4th week, she was on her knees in the dirt when she heard the back door open and felt, without turning, the specific quality of stillness that Damien brought into a space. She kept working. "The rosemary's going to overtake the thyme if you don't separate them," he said. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she'd planted. He was right. She didn't say so. "I'll deal with it." "I'm not criticizing." "I know." She pulled a root fragment from the soil. "I didn't say you were." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing, slow, even. The breathing of a man who had trained himself not to give anything away, even through something as involuntary as air. "She grew lavender along the east-facing section," he said. "My mother said the orientation was correct for it." Isabella looked at the east wall. Stone, warm in the morning sun, sheltered from the north wind by the estate's main bulk. He was right about that too. "I'll get lavender starts," she said. He didn't respond immediately. When she finally turned to look at him, he was already heading back inside, one hand flat against the doorframe, not quite pushing through yet. "Clara keeps a list of preferred suppliers," he said without turning. "Tell her what you need." The door closed. Isabella looked at the east wall for a long time after that. The trouble started, the real trouble, the kind with edges, on a Friday evening when Damien had guests. He had warned her, the way he always did. Brief, informational, stripped of context. "I have business tonight, the east dining room. You won't be expected." She had nodded and eaten in the kitchen with Clara and spent the evening reading in her sitting room with the door closed, listening to the low murmur of male voices drifting occasionally through the structure of the house, the way sound traveled through old stone buildings. She wasn't curious about the content. She had made herself genuinely incurious about the content, because there were certain things it was safer to simply not know. She went to bed at 10. At 20 past 11, she woke up because someone was arguing, not in the house. Outside. On the south terrace, directly beneath her window, the voices coming up through the gap in the casement she had left open 2 inches for air, 2 men. One of them was Damien. She knew his voice by now, low, measured, with a particular quality of controlled force beneath it, like a hand that could crush something choosing not to. The other voice was older, rougher, with an accent she couldn't place. "She doesn't belong here, Damien. This whole arrangement is sentiment disguised as strategy, and you know it. Watch yourself." Damien's voice dropped, which somehow made it more dangerous, not less. "I'm watching. I've been watching. You married a ranch girl to retire a farmer's debt, and you're calling that protection. Half the city's laughing." "Then let them laugh." "It's not a joke." A pause, the sound of glass being set down on stone. "She's a liability. An unknown quantity in your house, in your life, with access to things. She doesn't have access to anything relevant." "How would you know? You barely look at her." A silence, longer than the last one. "This conversation is finished," Damien said. "Damien, finished, Marco." Footsteps on stone, a door, then nothing. Isabella lay very still in the dark, her eyes open, her breathing deliberate. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that felt clinical, almost separate from herself. She waited until the silence had been silence for several minutes, and then she got up and went to the window and looked down at the empty terrace and the empty chairs and the single glass that had been left behind. She didn't feel afraid. She felt, with cold precision, the contours of the world she was actually in. The next morning, Damien was in the kitchen when she came down. Not often. He was rarely there, and his presence made the room feel different, altered, like the gravity had shifted slightly. Clara was conspicuously busy at the stove. Isabella poured her coffee and sat down across the table from him. He looked up from whatever he was reading. She met his eyes. "Who is Marco?" Something happened in his face. Fast, controlled, but she was learning to catch the small things. Where did you hear that name? Last night, South Terrace. The window was open. She held his gaze. I wasn't listening on purpose. I was trying to sleep. He set down what he was reading. His hands were flat on the table, perfectly still. He's a business associate, Damien said. He thinks I'm a liability. Marco's opinions on my household are not your concern. He said half the city is laughing at you. She said it plainly, without cruelty, just laying it there between them. Is that true? No. He picked up his reading again. And if it were, it would be my problem to address. I'm just asking, you're asking questions that aren't yours to ask. He said it without looking up now, and his voice had shifted back to the register she recognized from the first night. Formal, closed, no entry point anywhere. This is what I told you at the beginning. There are areas that aren't yours. Isabella felt the heat rise in her chest. Not anger exactly. Something more tired than anger. I'm not asking about your business, she said. I'm asking because someone in your organization thinks I'm a problem, and I'd like to know if I need to be concerned about that. He looked up then. She held it. You don't, he said. You're certain? Yes. Because you'd handle it? Yes. She nodded, drank her coffee, set the cup down. That's a very efficient way to make someone feel completely alone, she said. He said nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten, just slightly, just for a moment, and then she got up and took her cup to the sink and went out to the garden, and neither of them finished what had started at that table. She called her father that afternoon. Thomas sounded better, not good, not the way he used to sound, but less scraped, less like a man holding himself together through pure will. The ranch hands were still coming. The equipment hadn't been repossessed. The bank had received what it needed. You okay? He asked her. Yes, she said. Isabella. I'm okay, Dad. The house is... It's a lot. It's big. She looked out across the grounds from where she was sitting on the garden wall. I'm managing. Is he... Thomas stopped, started again. Is he treating you right? She thought about the coffee on the counter every morning, about the east wall and the lavender, and the way he had said his mother's name. Not said it exactly, more dropped it into the air between them, like a stone dropped into water, and then walked away before the ripples reached him. He's treating me like someone in a contract, she said, which is what I am. Thomas was quiet. That might change, he said. He didn't sound convinced. Maybe, Isabella said. She stayed on the wall for a while after she hung up, looking at the lavender she hadn't planted yet because the starts hadn't arrived, looking at the space she was going to put them, thinking about people who built walls and called it protection, and then forgot that the wall kept things out in both directions. The starts arrived on Wednesday. She was planting them on Thursday afternoon, knees in the dirt again, hands working, the smell of the crushed leaves on her fingers when she brushed them. When she heard footsteps on the garden path that were too light to be Damien's and too purposeful to be Clara's. She turned. The woman standing at the edge of the garden was perhaps 45, dark-haired, dressed in a way that suggested money so entrenched it no longer needed to announce itself. She was carrying nothing. She stood with the particular ease of someone who considered most spaces rightfully theirs. You must be the wife, the woman said. Isabella stood up slowly. She did not brush the dirt from her knees. I am. Serena Vale. The woman extended her hand with a smile that was entirely surface. Damien and I go back a long time. Isabella shook it. Isabella Whitmore. Moretti now. Serena's smile stayed fixed. Though I suppose you keep both in your circumstances. I use both, Isabella said evenly. Serena's gaze moved across the garden, taking in the transplanted herbs, the turned soil, the lavender just put into the ground. Something in her expression shifted in a way that looked like amusement, but felt like something with more intent underneath it. You've been busy, she said. It's good work. Is it? Serena looked at her directly. I suppose one needs a project. Isabella held her gaze and said nothing. I came to see Damien, Serena said. We have matters to discuss, but I'm glad I ran into you. She tilted her head, that smile not quite shifting. You should know that people in this city have long memories. They remember who Damien was with before, who he trusted. A pause. Some things are difficult to replace, even with effort. I'm sure that's true, Isabella said. You're not what anyone expected. No, Isabella agreed. I imagine not. Something moved through Serena's expression, a flicker of reassessment. She hadn't expected agreement. People in her world, Isabella suspected, didn't often simply agree with the thing being used to diminish them. Damien is in his office, Isabella said. Clara can show you. She turned back to the lavender and went back to work, and she heard Serena's footsteps on the path moving away toward the house, and she pressed her fingers into the soil and breathed slowly and told herself that her hands were not shaking. They weren't quite. That evening, she heard them. Not arguing, not the way Marco had been arguing, but something more intimate and therefore more difficult to hear. Voices in the west corridor near Damien's office. Serena's voice, low and warm and confident in a way that suggested she had stood in that corridor many times before. Damien's measured, as always, giving nothing away. Isabella went to her room. She picked up her book. She read the same paragraph 4 times. She put the book down. She was not going to be the woman who listened at doors. She was not going to be the woman who constructed a crisis from overheard tone. She was going to be exactly what she had told Damien she was on the first night. Present, clear-eyed, not invisible, not drama. But she lay there in the dark again that night, and the silence of the house pressed down, and she thought about Serena Vale and the way she had said Moretti, now in that specific tone, and the way Damien's voice in the corridor had been warmer than she had ever heard it directed at anyone in this house, and she felt, with quiet precision, how little she actually knew about the life she had walked into. She was still lying there at midnight when she heard his footsteps in the corridor, recognizable by now. The particular weight and rhythm of them, the way they slowed outside her door. They stopped. She held very still. A moment. 2. Then they moved on. She exhaled into the dark. The next morning, Nathan Cole called. She hadn't spoken to Nathan in 6 weeks, since before the wedding, since a phone call that had been painful in ways she hadn't fully let herself feel at the time. Nathan had been her oldest friend, raised on the neighboring property 2 parcels east, the kind of friendship that had survived distance and time, and the general chaos of separate lives. He had not been at the wedding. She hadn't invited him. She hadn't known how to explain the invitation. I heard from your dad, he said, that you're settled? That's one word for it. Isabella. His voice was different from Damien's in every way, warm, familiar, carrying the specific weight of someone who had known her when she was 13 and afraid of nothing. Are you actually okay? She was in her sitting room. The door was closed. Outside, somewhere in the West Wing, she could hear the muffled sound of Damien on a call. I'm finding my footing, she said. That's not what I asked. She pressed her free hand flat against her thigh. I know. You can leave, he said. Whatever it looks like from outside, whatever he said, whatever arrangement, you can leave. Your dad's dead is what it is, but it's not worth... Nathan, she said it carefully. I chose this. You were coerced into this. There's a difference between coercion and limited options. She stared at the window. I'm managing. I'm more than managing, actually. I'm doing things here that feel like mine. A garden, he said. He'd clearly talked to her father in more detail than just a quick check-in. A garden, she confirmed, and other things, small things. She paused. It matters. Come home, he said, just for a few days. Your dad would love to see you. I would love to see you. She thought about it. She thought about Willowmere, the smell of it, the sound of it, the way the cottonwoods moved in the evening. She thought about who she had been before a white dress, and a cathedral, and a hall full of strangers. Let me ask, she said. She brought it up that evening. Damien was in the library. He used it sometimes in the evenings, which surprised her. She hadn't taken him for a reader, but he was, in the methodical way of someone for whom information was always a tool. He looked up when she came in. I'd like to visit my family, she said. A few days. The ranch. He held her gaze. When? Next weekend. Thursday to Sunday. He looked back at his book. Fine. She waited for something else. Nothing came. "That's it?" she said. "What else do you need?" "I don't know. A condition, a restriction, a caveat." She found herself slightly wrong-footed by the ease of it. "You're just fine with it." He looked up again. Something moved in his face that she might, in another context, have called dry. "I'm not your warden, Isabella," he said. "Go see your family." She went on Thursday. Willowmere in late season was exactly what she needed in a way she hadn't let herself admit she needed. The horses, the smell of the barn, her mother's kitchen, Thomas looking better, still marked by the last 2 years, but the specific haunted quality was lifting, and he hugged her at the door with both arms and held on, and she let him and pressed her face against the shoulder of his work shirt and breathed. Nathan came over Friday evening. They sat on the porch the way they had sat on that porch 100 times. Legs stretched out, cold drinks, watching the light go down across the fields. He looked the same, easier and the same, the Nathan she had always known. And something in her chest that had been clenched for weeks loosened slightly just from being near someone who had known her whole life. They talked about the ranch, they talked about his property, they talked around the obvious thing for about 40 minutes, and then Nathan put down his drink and looked at her directly. "You look thinner," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not sleeping." "Nathan, I'm not criticizing. I'm looking at you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You have this look, like you're always calculating something, like part of your brain never turns off anymore." She opened her mouth to deny it, closed it. "It's a different kind of life," she said finally. Does any part of it?" He seemed to search for the word. "Does any part of it feel real?" She thought about the coffee on the counter. She thought about the east wall and the lavender. She thought about footsteps stopping outside her door at midnight and then moving on. "Parts of it," she said. "Small parts." Nathan reached over and touched her arm. The easy, unthinking contact of old friendship, brief. His hand on her forearm for just a moment. She didn't hear the car on the drive until it was already through the gate. She looked up. The black car, one of the estate cars, she recognized it immediately, came to a stop in the yard, and the driver got out and opened the rear door, and Damian Moretti stepped out onto the gravel of Willowmere Ranch with his jacket over one arm and his eyes moving across the porch with the careful, unhurried attention of a man cataloging a scene. His gaze found Isabella. Then it moved to Nathan, then to Nathan's hand on her arm. Nathan pulled his hand back, not guiltily, just naturally, a normal adjustment. But the movement happened in the same moment Damian's gaze locked on it, and Isabella watched, from 15 feet away, as something passed through Damian Moretti's face that she had never seen there before. Not cold this time, not controlled, something that looked, with alarming clarity, like a man discovering something he did not know he was capable of feeling, and hating himself for it in real time. She stood up from her chair. "Damian," she said, "what are you doing here?" He looked at her. The expression was closed again, fast as a door slamming, but she had seen it. She had seen it. "We need to go back," he said. His voice was level. His eyes were not. "I'm not supposed to leave until Sunday," she said carefully. "Plans changed." He held her gaze. "I'll explain on the way." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathan, who was watching Damian with the particular measured attention of a man who had grown up reading difficult situations on a working ranch and knew when something had weight to it. She looked back at Damian. He was watching Nathan again. And Isabella Whitmore understood, standing on the porch of her childhood home in the last light of a Friday evening, that the careful, controlled distance Damian Moretti had been maintaining for 6 weeks had just cracked. Not all the way. Not enough for him to see it fully yet, but enough that the air between them had fundamentally changed, and nothing about the drive back to the estate was going to be comfortable. And the man standing in the yard looking at Nathan Cole with that expression on his face was not the same man who had told her their marriage was a contract. He was something else now, something more dangerous, and she didn't know yet whether that terrified her or not. Nobody spoke on the drive back. That was the worst of it. Not an argument, not an accusation, just the particular quality of silence that exists between two people when something has been seen that cannot be unseen, and both of them know it, and neither of them is ready to name it yet. The car moved through the dark Illinois countryside, and Isabella sat in the back seat with 6 inches of space between her and Damien and watched the fields go past and felt the heat coming off him like something physical, like standing next to a furnace that was running too hot but hadn't broken yet. She had said goodbye to Nathan on the porch. Nathan had held himself very still and watched Damien with the careful, reading the weather expression that she knew meant he was taking in more than he was showing, and when she touched his hand briefly in farewell, he had looked at her with something in his eyes that she didn't have time to fully interpret before Damien was already moving toward the car. Her father had come to the door. He had looked at Damien, and Damien had looked back at him. And Thomas Whitmore had said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. The driver kept his eyes forward. 40 minutes. When they turned through the estate gates and the car stopped at the entrance, Damien was out before it fully stopped moving. Not rushed, just immediate. The movement of a man who has been holding something in check for too long and needs the physical act of moving to manage it. Isabella got out on her own side and followed him through the front entrance and into the main hall, and that was where she stopped. "Say it," she said. He turned. He was across the hall from her, maybe 15 feet, and the distance felt charged in a way that the last 6 weeks of careful coexistence had never been. His jacket was still over one arm. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing she had seen on the porch, that dark interior conflict that he was trying to iron flat with sheer will and wasn't quite managing. "Say what?" he said. "Whatever you came to Willowmere to say." She held her ground. "Because you didn't drive 40 minutes to a ranch because plans changed. There were no changed plans." He was quiet. "You came because of Nathan," she said. "I came because—" "Don't." Her voice was steady, but there was something harder underneath it now, something that had been building since the porch. "Don't give me a management answer. Don't give me the version you'd give Marco or one of your people. I live in this house. I'm your wife. Give me the real answer." The word wife landed differently than it had before. She felt it. She watched him feel it. "Who is he to you?" Damien said. It wasn't quite a question. The inflection was wrong for a question. Too flat, too controlled, the voice of a man asking something he already half knows the answer to and is bracing for the half. He doesn't. "He's my oldest friend," she said. "He grew up 2 properties over. I've known him my whole life." "He was touching you." "He touched my arm." She said it precisely. "The way a person who has known you for 20 years touches your arm. That's what you drove 40 minutes for." Damien set his jacket down on the side table. The movement was very deliberate, the deliberateness of a man managing his own hands. "You were laughing," he said, quieter now. "When I came through the gate, you were laughing at something he said." Isabella opened her mouth, closed it, because there was something in the way he said it, not accusing, not cold, just stripped of the usual scaffolding, just the raw fact of it sitting there between them, that stopped her rebuttal before it formed. "Yes," she said. "I was." "I've been in this house with you for 6 weeks, he said. "I have not heard you laugh like that." The silence that followed was a different kind from the car, heavier, more honest. "That's not something you get to hold against me," she said finally. Her voice had gone quieter too, but not softer. "You set the terms of this. You told me what this was and what it wasn't. You don't get to be angry that I'm a full human being with a history and people who know me." "I'm not angry." "You drove to my family's ranch unannounced because you're not angry." His jaw tightened. "I wanted to see the property, ensure the arrangement was—" "Damien." She said his name the way you say something to make it stop moving. "Stop." He stopped. She looked at him across the hall, really looked. The way she had been learning to look these past weeks, past the surface, past the management, at the actual man underneath who was standing there with his hands still, and his face almost controlled, and something in his eyes that he absolutely did not want her to see. "If you have something to say to me," she said, "say it. But say the true thing." He held her gaze for a long time. Then he turned and walked to his office, and the door closed, and Isabella stood alone in the hall and breathed and told herself that whatever had just happened was not her problem to carry. She carried it anyway. Up to her room, into the dark, through another night that didn't quite become sleep. In the morning, Clara brought her tea instead of coffee. The look on Clara's face when she set it down was careful in a specific way. The careful of someone who knows more than they're saying and is weighing what's safe to offer. Last night was... Isabella started. I know, Clara said. He came to the ranch. I know that too. Isabella wrapped both hands around the mug. Has he done things like that before? With whoever was here before me? Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down across from Isabella at the small table in the sitting room, which she had never done before, always standing, always in the professional register of her role, and folded her hands on the table. There was no one like you before you, Clara said. There were arrangements. There were women in his life who understood the world he was in and moved through it accordingly. She paused. None of them planted his mother's garden. Isabella absorbed that. Serena Vale, she said. Clara's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Isabella was learning imperceptible. Serena is a woman who has been waiting for Damien to be available for about 7 years. In her understanding of it, she has been patient. In his, I don't think she's crossed his mind in quite that way for most of that time. Clara looked at her directly. She will not see it that way. She came here. She comes here periodically. She has standing in his professional world. He won't cut that off because it would look reactive, and Damien Moretti does not do reactive. A pause. Usually. Isabella thought about a black car coming through the gate at Willowmere. Right, she said. The day was ordinary on the surface. Garden work, household rhythms, the normal movement of staff through the estate's functions. She did not see Damien until late afternoon, when she came through the main hall on her way to the library and found him standing at the window that looked out over the south grounds, hands in his pockets, looking at something she couldn't identify at that distance. He turned when he heard her. I owe you an explanation, he said. She waited. What I said last night about not being angry. He stopped, reassembled. That wasn't accurate. I know. I don't... He stopped again. She had never seen him struggle with words before. The man could deliver a flat, complete, weaponized sentence without any visible effort. This was different. I don't have a vocabulary for this. I want you to understand that I'm not... This isn't something I have practice with. Being honest. Being... He looked at her. Uncertain. The word cost him something. She could see it. Okay, she said carefully. Nathan Cole. He said the name with the specific even-handedness of someone trying very hard to be fair. He's important to you. He's my friend. He looks at you like he wants more than that. She held his gaze. That's Nathan's business. It's mine too, while you carry my name. Then maybe, she said, very quietly, very precisely, you should have thought about what it means to carry your name before you handed it to someone and then kept them at arm's length for 6 weeks. The quiet that followed was not empty. It had mass. You're right, he said. She had not expected that. I handled this wrong from the beginning, he said. He wasn't looking away. I treated this like an acquisition, like something to be managed. His jaw moved. You're not a thing to be managed. No, she agreed. I'm not. I don't know how to do this differently, he said. I want you to know that I'm aware of that. It's not... He stopped. It's not an excuse, it's just what's true. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was coming through the window behind him, and he looked, in that light, less like the man she had walked toward in a cathedral and more like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was only now considering that he might be allowed to set it down. Tell me something true, she said. Something that has nothing to do with the contract or the arrangement or what Marco or Serena or anyone else in your world thinks. He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. I watched you in the garden this morning, he said. From the upstairs window, you were talking to the plants. A pause. The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. I don't know why that mattered, but it did. She felt something shift in her chest. Small. Tectonic. That's a start, she said. That night was different. Not dramatically. Nothing declared, nothing promised. But the dinner that Clara set in the main dining room was eaten by both of them, at the same table, for the first time. They talked about small things. The garden, a horse he had apparently owned years ago, before the estate became what it was. She told him about Willowmere in summer, the way the light hit the hayfields in the early evening, the specific sound of the cottonwoods. He listened in a way she hadn't seen him listen to anything before, fully, without the part of his attention that was always scanning for threat. She went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt in this house before, almost safe. She should have known better. The call came on Tuesday. She was in the library when she heard Damien's voice from down the corridor. Not the content, just the tone, which was different from any tone she had heard from him before. Sharper. Higher in register, which for him meant something was very wrong. She heard his office door close, and then the house was quiet, and she stayed in the library and told herself it was not her business. 20 minutes later, he came through the library door. She looked up. His face was the most frightening she had ever seen it. Not angry, not cold, but something prior to both of those things. Something that lived underneath anger and cold, in the place where a person goes when something has been done to them that they were not prepared for. I need you to tell me exactly what you and Nathan Cole discussed when you were at the ranch, he said. She set down her book. What? What you talked about, the content, specifically. Damien, what's happening? Please. The word came out stripped of everything except the need underneath it. Just tell me, she told him. Everything she could remember. The porch, the conversation, the reaching around the obvious thing for 40 minutes, Nathan saying she looked thinner, the conversation about the ranch, the brief moment his hand had touched her arm. Damien listened with his arms crossed over his chest and his eyes fixed somewhere on the middle distance and his jaw working. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Did you tell him anything about this house? He said. About my schedule, my associates, anything you'd seen or heard? She felt cold. No. Why would I? Marco Vitelli is dead, he said. The room went very still. He was found this morning, Damien said. Someone with access to information about his movements, his schedule, his security rotation made it possible. He held her gaze, and she saw, with nauseating clarity, what he was doing, what he was weighing. The information that was used, some of it could only have come from someone inside this house or someone connected to it. Isabella stood up. Her legs were steadier than she expected. You're not asking me what Nathan and I talked about, she said. You're asking me if I told him something that got a man killed. He said nothing, which was its own answer. The cold that moved through her was not fear. It was something older and more corrosive. The specific sensation of being looked at by someone whose opinion of you has just split down the middle. I need you to answer the question, he said. I already answered it. Isabella, I told you what we talked about. Her voice was completely flat now. I have never discussed anything in this house with anyone outside it. I have never given Nathan Cole or anyone else any information about your people, your schedule, or anything that happens here. She held his gaze. If you can't take my word on that, then we have a much larger problem than a dead man. He looked at her for a very long time. I believe you, he said. That doesn't feel like believing me. I had to ask. You had to ask if your wife helped arrange a murder. She said it plainly. Yes, I understand why. That doesn't mean it didn't just happen. He moved toward her. She took one step back, not from fear, just from the need to keep some space between them while she processed what the last 3 minutes had done to the delicate, tentative thing that had been building since the window and the dinner table. The breach came from inside this organization, he said. The person who gave up Marco's movements has been with us for 4 years. We found the communications an hour ago. He paused. It wasn't you. It was never going to be you. But I needed to rule it. You needed to rule out your wife before you ruled out your own people, she said. The silence that followed was the worst yet. Yes, he said. She picked up her book from the table. She held it against her chest like something to press against. "Who was it?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Someone I trusted. Someone from inside. Yes." "Then the breach isn't closed," she said slowly. "If they gave up Marco, they can give up anything. They can give up—" She stopped. She looked at him and saw in his face that he had already arrived at this, that he had been sitting with it for the 20 minutes she'd been in the library, listening to his tone change through the wall. "They can give up me." "Yes," he said. "That's why you came in here. Not just to ask about Nathan. You came in here because whoever leaked Marco's information could use me, could make me—" She stopped again. Her mind was running faster than her words. "I'm a weakness. I'm outside your world enough to be accessible. I don't have the protections your people have. I don't know enough to be careful about the things that need to be careful." She looked at him. "I'm an entry point." Damien Moretti, the man who controlled an empire through fear and precision and the absolute command of every room he entered, looked at his wife in the library of the house where his mother had planted lavender and said nothing, because she was exactly right, and they both knew it, and the silence said everything the words hadn't. "What happens now?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Now I find who did this. And me? You stay inside the estate until I know the perimeter is clean." She felt the walls of the house close in slightly. Not dramatically, just a degree, the way a space changes when the options inside it reduce. "For how long?" "I don't know." She nodded, turned toward the door. "Isabella." She stopped, didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what I implied. Coming in here." She stood very still for a moment. "I know what you had to do," she said. "I understand the logic of it." She paused. "That doesn't mean I feel nothing." She walked out of the library and she went upstairs and she sat on the edge of her bed in the afternoon light and pressed her hands together between her knees and thought about Marco Vitelli's voice coming up through the window at night, saying she doesn't belong here, Damien, and the specific irony that the man who had said she was a liability was now dead, and the breach that killed him might end up threatening her, and the husband who had asked her this week if she was real, who had watched her talk to plants from an upstairs window and found that it mattered, had just stood in the library and weighed whether she was capable of being complicit in murder. And the worst of it, the thing she sat with in the quiet of the afternoon, was that she understood why. She understood his logic completely. She understood the world he lived in, the calculations he was required to make, the way trust in that world was not a feeling but a liability assessment. She understood it. And understanding it didn't stop it from landing like a fist in the center of her chest, and sitting there and changing the shape of something she hadn't fully admitted to herself yet was growing. Her phone buzzed. "Nathan." She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Isabella." His voice was different, compressed. "I need you to listen to me. Something happened this morning, and I need you to know about it before—" A pause. The sound of him moving, a door closing. "Before you hear it from him." She went very still. "What happened?" she said. "A man came to the ranch this morning, before sunrise. He came to my property, actually, my front gate, left something." Nathan paused again. "A photograph of you and me on the porch Friday night, and a note." The cold that moved through her this time started at the base of her spine. "What did the note say?" she said. Nathan's voice when he answered was careful in a way she had never heard from him. The careful of a man who understands he has been pulled into something that has weight and edges and will not let go easily. It said, "Tell her that her husband is not the only one who knows where she is." Isabella sat on the edge of her bed in the afternoon light of the Moretti estate, with the walls already closing and the perimeter already compromised, and a husband who had just asked if she was capable of being part of a murder. And she understood with absolute bone-level clarity that she was no longer a woman in a difficult marriage navigating complicated feelings. She was a target, and the person who had taken that photograph on the porch at Willowmere had been there before Damien arrived, which meant they had been watching before anyone knew she was going to be there, which meant the breach in the Moretti organization was not just a leak, but a weapon already aimed, and she was standing directly in its path with no training, no protection, and a husband who was only now beginning to let himself feel something for her, which made her not safer, but more exposed, because the most dangerous thing in Damien Moretti's world was not his enemies. It was anyone he could be made to care about losing. She told him about the call. Not immediately. She sat with it for 4 minutes, alone on the edge of the bed, running the math in her head, calculating what telling him would cost versus what not telling him would cost, and the calculation was not close. She went downstairs. He was in his office with 2 men she had seen before in the house. Not staff, not the domestic kind of presence, but the other kind. The kind that stood with their weight slightly forward and their eyes always moving. He was at his desk. The 2 men were standing. All 3 of them looked up when she opened the door without knocking. The 2 men looked at Damien. He looked at her face. "Give us a minute," he said. They left without a word. She crossed the room and set her phone on his desk with Nathan's contact still on screen. "Nathan just called me. A man came to his property before sunrise this morning, left a photograph of us on the porch Friday night and a note saying I'm being watched, that I'm not safe." Damien looked at the phone, then at her. "Say that again, Omas," he said. She said it again. All of it. Every word Nathan had used, the timeline, the front gate, the photograph, the specific language of the note. Damien listened without moving, without any expression she could name, but something was happening behind his eyes that she had not seen before. A cold ignition, like watching a furnace light in a space that had been dark. He picked up the phone and called someone. Not Nathan. Someone else, a name she didn't catch. And the conversation lasted 45 seconds and consisted almost entirely of the other person talking while Damien listened and said 3 words at the end. "Bring him in." He set the phone down. "Who are you bringing in?" she said. "The man who I believe took that photograph." "You already know." "I have a strong suspicion. I've had it since this morning. The photograph confirms the timeline." He stood up. "I need you to stay in the East Wing. Don't use your phone except to call Clara or me. Don't go near the exterior doors." "Damien." "Isabella." He came around the desk and he stopped in front of her, and she could feel the heat coming off him again. The same as the car, but different in character now. Not the contained, conflicted heat of a man dealing with jealousy he wouldn't name, but the focused, combustive heat of a man shifting into the version of himself that had built an empire. "I need you to trust me for the next few hours. Can you do that?" She looked at him. "Tell me what's happening," she said. "When it's done. Now. Tell me now. Because you asked me this morning whether I helped get Marco Vitelli killed, which means you pulled me into this, and I am not going back upstairs to sit in a room and wait while the man who leaked Marco's information has been with my organization since before my father died," he said. Clipped, fast, the words of someone making a decision about how much to give in real time. "His name is Reeves. He has been feeding information to a competing organization for approximately 8 months. We believe it started as financial. Reeves has debts of his own and progressed to operational. Marco found out. That's why Marco is dead." He held her gaze. "Reeves knows the photograph of you exists because he took it or had it taken. He knows you went to Willowmere. He knows your connection to Nathan Cole, and he will use you as leverage if I get too close." The room was very quiet. "He's going to try to trade me," she said. "He's going to try to threaten me with you," Damien said. "Yes." "To make you back off." "Yes." She breathed in, out, steady. "How close are you?" she said. "I'm going to have him in this house within 2 hours." She looked at him. "Go," she said. "I'll be in the East Wing." Something moved through his face, fast, complicated, not quite any one thing. "Thank you," he said. She turned and walked to the door. She stopped. "Damien?" She didn't turn around. "When this is done, when it's actually done, you and I are going to have a real conversation. Not a contract conversation, not a management conversation." She paused. "A real one." She heard him breathe. "Yes," he said. "We are." She went upstairs. The next 2 hours were the longest she had spent in the estate. She sat in the window seat of her sitting room with her knees pulled up and watched the grounds and listened to the house the way you listen to a building during a storm, for the sounds that tell you which way things are moving. She heard cars. She heard voices, low and purposeful, in the lower floors. She heard a door somewhere slam with more force than usual, and then a silence that had a different quality from the silences she had learned in 6 weeks here. Clara came up at the 90-minute mark with tea and sat with her without being asked. "How bad is it?" Isabella said. "It's being handled," Clara said. "That's not what I asked." Clara looked at her hands. "The man they're bringing in, Reeves, he's been here a long time. Long enough that people trusted him with things that required real trust." She paused. "When someone like that turns, the damage it goes deep." "Did you know him?" "Everyone knew him." A pause. "I didn't know what he was." Isabella looked out the window. One of the exterior security team was moving along the south perimeter in a pattern she didn't usually see. Wider sweeps, checking angles she didn't normally watch. "He took a photograph of me," she said. "He was at the ranch before anyone knew I was going to be there." Clara was quiet. "That means he's been following me since before I was married," Isabella said. "Or someone assigned him to it later and he had resources I don't understand." She turned from the window. "Either way, he had access to me before anyone in this house thought I was worth protecting." Clara's face did something complicated. "Damien's going to want to know that framing." "He's going to have to hear it," Isabella said. The sound came from the lower floor. Not a shout, not a crash, but a specific kind of raised voice, male, arguing, quickly suppressed. The house absorbed it and went quiet again. 20 minutes later, Damien's footsteps on the stairs. He came through her sitting room door without knocking. They were past that now, or something had pushed them past it. And he looked like a man who had just come through something. Not disheveled, not physically marked, but carrying it in his eyes and in the set of his shoulders, and in the way he stood in the doorway for a moment just looking at her. "It's him," he said. "Reeves." "Yes." He came into the room. He sat down in the chair across from her window seat, something he had never done, never come into this room at all before tonight. "He's been running information to a man named Carver, regional competitor, has been trying to find a foothold into the city for 2 years. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Marco found evidence 3 weeks ago. He came to me with it the night of the dinner, the night you overheard us on the terrace. He wasn't calling you a liability in that conversation. He was telling me he thought we had a leak and he was afraid of who it was and he didn't want to say the name with anyone else present." Isabella absorbed this slowly. "He thought I might overhear," she said. "He didn't know you were there. He was being cautious." Damien's jaw worked. Marco was trying to protect me. He was one of the people who had been with this family since before I ran it. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved again. He found the evidence and he came to me, and 3 days later he was dead, which means Reeves knew Marco had found him and moved first, and the photograph of me. Reeves knew that taking you, or threatening you, was the most direct way to get to me. He was building leverage before he needed it. He held her gaze. He underestimated how fast we'd close on him. "Or he was counting on you being distracted," she said. A pause. "By what?" Damien said. "By whatever was happening between us," she said. She said it plainly. No softness. No deflection. "If someone has been watching this house and watching you, they saw the way things were shifting. They saw the drive to Willowmere. They saw everything." She held his gaze. "They used it." He was very still. "Yes," he said. "Which means people in your world now know that I am something you would drive 40 minutes for at 10 o'clock at night," she said. "Which means the target that was theoretical before is not theoretical anymore." "I know." "What happens to Reeves?" He looked at her steadily. "He won't be a problem." She held his gaze and understood that she was not going to get more specific than that, and that she had to decide in this moment whether she was going to ask for it or accept the line she was standing at. She accepted it. "Carver," she said, "Reeves's contact. Is he finished too?" "No," Damien said. "Carver is the problem that comes next. Reeves was the opening he was using. Closing the opening doesn't close Carver. He stood. The decision-making energy was back in him, that particular forward gravity. I have people working on it. It will take Damien. She stood too. I'm not asking for a briefing. I'm asking because I need to know if I need to be afraid in this house. He stopped. He turned to face her fully and said, without any of the management register, without any scaffolding, I will not let anything happen to you. That's not the same as telling me I'm safe. No, he agreed. It's not. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. Okay. He started toward the door. Stay, she said. He stopped. She had not planned to say it. It came out of something below planning, something tired and honest and past the point of performing composure. I'm not asking for anything. I just don't want to be alone in this room tonight. Sit, read, do whatever you need to do. She stopped, looked at the window. Just stay in the house tonight where I can hear you moving. The silence was long. Yes, he said. I'll stay. He brought work. She didn't ask what kind, and sat in the chair across from her, and she sat in the window seat, and they stayed like that for 2 hours while the house resettled around them and the security team ran its wider sweeps outside, and Clara brought food that neither of them ate much of, and the night deepened into the kind of quiet that comes after something has broken and before it's been decided what to build in its place. At some point, Isabella fell asleep in the window seat. She didn't intend to. One moment she was watching the light on the south grounds, and the next, she was waking up with something draped over her, a blanket, warm, placed there by someone while she slept. And the chair across from her was empty, but the light in the corridor outside was still on. She did not fall back asleep. She sat in the dark and thought about the shape of the thing she was in. At 6 a.m, Clara told her that a car had arrived at 3 a.m. and that Damien had gone somewhere and had not yet returned. At 8, the car came back through the gate. She watched from the window. Damien got out. He stood in the drive for a moment with his hand flat on the roof of the car, looking at the ground. Then he straightened, and she could see from 2 floors up that whatever had been at stake through the night had been resolved, and that the resolution had cost him something, and that he was deciding right now whether to let it show or not. He looked up. He saw her in the window. They looked at each other across the distance. He lifted his hand, just slightly, the smallest possible gesture that still counted as one. She put her palm against the glass. He went inside. She was in the library when he found her, an hour later. Showered, changed, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her cup prepared correctly, as always, and she felt that land in her chest differently now than it had the first morning, felt the full weight of what that small habitual thing meant when you held it up against everything else. He set her cup in front of her and sat across the table. It's done, he said. Reeves. And the immediate exposure to Carver, his access to information about this house, is severed. He wrapped both hands around his cup. He'll regroup. It won't be forever, but it gives us time. Time for what? She said. To make decisions. He looked at her. About how things are going to be. She waited. I have been running this organization on the premise that keeping people at a distance keeps them safe, he said. My mother died because someone used her to get to my father. After that, the lesson I took was, don't let anyone close enough to be used. He stopped. His hands tightened slightly on the cup. What happened with Reeves demonstrates that the lesson was wrong. The closer you are to me, the more resources I put toward protecting you. The further away, he stopped again. The further away, and you're a target I haven't secured. Isabella looked at him. You're saying the strategy of keeping me at arm's length made me less safe, she said. Yes. So the solution is to keep me closer. The solution is to stop pretending this is only a contract. He held her gaze. I don't know how to do this. I want to be honest about that. I have significant deficits in... Damien! She cut him off, not unkindly. I know. I'm not finished. She waited. I watched you sleep last night, he said, in the window seat. And I thought about what I would have done if Reeves had moved faster, if Carver had made a play before we closed it. He set his cup down. His hands were flat on the table and they were not entirely steady. I thought about what this house would be if you weren't in it. Her throat tightened. And, she said, and I'm done treating you like a liability that needs to be managed from a safe distance, he said. Whatever this is, whatever we are, it is not a contract anymore. It hasn't been for weeks. I've been the only one pretending otherwise. She held his gaze for a long time. I know, she said again. I hurt you, he said, in the library, asking what I asked. You did what your world required. I did what I've always done, which is assume that protecting myself from feeling something is the same as protecting the people around me. His jaw worked. It isn't. The morning light was coming through the library windows in long, horizontal shafts, and the dust moved in it the way dust always did in old rooms. And Isabella Whitmore sat across the table from the most feared man in the city and felt, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been bracing for impact for 2 months, the brace finally release. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He looked at her. I want to be clear about that, she said. Not because of the ranch, not because of the contract. Because I made a choice when I walked down that aisle, and I am still making it, and I need you to understand that I'm not doing it out of obligation anymore. She held his gaze. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was very still. Yes, he said. Say it back, she said. So I know you heard it. He looked at her across the library table in the long morning light, and he said, You're choosing to stay. I'm choosing to stay, she confirmed. The silence that followed was the cleanest silence the house had held since she arrived. It lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Damien's phone went off. The specific ringtone she had learned meant something operational, not personal, and he picked it up and looked at the screen, and everything in his face that had just opened reclosed with the speed of a man who had been doing it his whole life. But not all the way. She could see the difference now. I have to take this, he said. Go, she said. He stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped in the doorway. Tonight, he said, without turning, I'd like to have dinner in the dining room with you. A pause. If that's something you'd want. She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, at the way he was holding the phone against his thigh, like a thing he wasn't ready to lift yet. Yes, she said, it is. He lifted the phone. He walked out. And Isabella sat in the library with her coffee going cold and her hands very still on the table and thought about choices and contracts and the very specific moment when a thing stops being one thing and becomes another. And she was still sitting there when she heard from somewhere in the east corridor raised voices. Not Damien, someone else, multiple people. The sound of someone arriving who had not been expected. And Clara's voice, sharp and alarmed in a register she had never used in 6 weeks, calling Damien's name with an urgency that brought Isabella to her feet before she had consciously decided to stand. She moved to the library door. Down the corridor toward the entrance hall, she could see Clara standing with one hand pressed flat against the wall, and her face doing something that Isabella had never seen on it. Not fear exactly, but the specific expression of someone who has just understood that something they hoped would stay outside has come through the door, and through the entrance hall itself, moving toward the main corridor with the particular confidence of someone who had been in this house before and intended to be heard, came Serena Vale. Not visiting, not professional. Dressed for impact, chin up, the energy of someone who had decided that patience was finished and had arrived to collect what she believed was owed. Her eyes found Isabella at the end of the corridor, and the smile that moved across Serena Vale's face was not the surface smile from the garden. It was something that had been waiting underneath it the entire time, patient and cold and entirely prepared for this moment. And Isabella felt the air in the corridor change the way air changes before something breaks. And behind Serena, through the entrance hall windows, she could see a second car pulling through the estate gate. Not one of Damien's fleet, not a car she recognized. And the shape of what was arriving assembled itself in Isabella's mind with the terrible clarity of a woman who had spent 2 months learning to read a world she had not been born into. And she understood that whatever had just been resolved in the library was about to be tested in a way that no amount of conversation could have prepared either of them for. Isabella did not step back. That was the first decision. Small, physical, made before her mind had fully caught up with what her body already understood. She stood in the library doorway with her hand on the frame, and she did not retreat. And Serena Vale came down the corridor with that cold, prepared smile and stopped 6 feet away. And the two women looked at each other in the morning light of the Moretti estate, while Clara stood against the wall and the sound of the second car outside settled into the particular silence of an engine cut. "You should go back to your room," Serena said. The tone was almost pleasant, almost maternal, in the specific way of a woman who has decided that condescension is a form of mercy. "This doesn't need to involve you." "This is my house," Isabella said. Serena's smile didn't move. "For now." "Who's in the second car?" Isabella said. Something shifted in Serena's eyes. A flicker of surprise quickly absorbed. She had not expected the question to be that direct, that fast. She had expected, Isabella understood, the version of her that Serena had constructed in her mind. The ranch girl, the debt repayment, the woman out of her depth who would need things explained slowly. "Someone who has information your husband needs to hear," Serena said. "Someone who came to me because they couldn't come to him directly." "Information about Carver," Isabella said. The flicker again. More pronounced this time. Damien's voice came from behind Isabella. She hadn't heard him come back down the corridor, but he was there, close, his presence shifting the weight of the space the way it always did. "Serena." His voice was flat and without any warmth at all. "Damien." Serena's composure did not break. She had clearly prepared for this entrance too, had run the scenario enough times that she had a response ready for every version of it. "I brought you something. Consider it a gift, or a demonstration." She glanced at Isabella, and for a moment the pleasantness dropped just far enough to show what was underneath it. "Of who in your life actually has the reach to help you?" "Who's outside?" Damien said. "His name is Teller. He worked for Carver for 6 years, and he wants out. He has documentation, financial, operational, enough to make Carver untouchable from the inside so you never have to go near him directly." She held Damien's gaze. "I've been building this for 4 months, since before any of this," a slight motion of her hand toward Isabella, "happened." "Why?" Damien said. "Because I know how you work. Because direct confrontation with Carver costs you blood and time and visibility you can't afford. Because I—" She stopped. The composure cracked, just slightly, just at the edges, and what showed through was not the cold strategy but something older and less managed underneath it. "Because I have been in this world longer than anyone gives me credit for, and I have spent 7 years waiting for you to see that." The corridor was very quiet. "You built this leverage," Damien said slowly, "and you waited, and you're bringing it now." "Yes." "Because of her." Not a question. Serena's jaw tightened. "Because it was time." Isabella looked at Damien. His face was doing the thing it did when he was running calculations. Still, interior, processing at a speed that didn't show on the surface. She looked back at Serena and saw, with a clarity that surprised her, the full shape of the woman in front of her. Not a villain, not a schemer in any simple sense. A woman who had been capable and present and patient for years, and had watched the thing she wanted given to someone else as a debt transaction, and had decided that demonstrating her value was the only move left. It was not a move Isabella respected, but she understood it. "Bring him in," Damien said. Serena blinked. "What?" "Teller. Bring him in." He held her gaze. "If the documentation is what you say it is, we'll verify it. If it closes Carver, I'll acknowledge that." His voice did not soften. "But I need you to understand something, Serena. Whatever you came here hoping this would change, it doesn't change it." The silence that followed had a specific weight. "Damien, it doesn't change it," he said again. Quieter. More final. Serena looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Isabella. A look that was complicated in ways that had nothing to do with strategy anymore. That was just a woman looking at the thing that had happened and trying to find a way to hold it that didn't destroy her. "I hope she's worth it," Serena said. "That's not for either of us to calculate," Damien said. Serena turned and walked back toward the entrance. Her posture did not change. Her chin did not drop. Whatever she was carrying, she carried it the way she had apparently carried everything. upright, without asking for help, all the way to the door and through it. Clara let out a breath that she had apparently been holding for 3 minutes. Damien turned to Isabella. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes." She looked at the entrance. "She loves you. She loves the idea of what I represent." "Maybe," Isabella said, "but it looked like more than that from where I was standing." She paused. "Bring Teller in. Verify what she brought. If it's real, use it." She met his eyes. "Don't waste what she built because of how she brought it." He looked at her for a moment. "You're remarkably fair-minded towards someone who just walked into your house to displace you," he said. "She didn't displace me," Isabella said. "She tried to remind you she existed." She held his gaze. "There's a difference." Damien studied her face. "Yes," he said. "There is." Teller was a slight man in his mid-40s with the look of someone who had been running a low-grade fever of anxiety for so long it had become his resting state. Thin, quick-eyed, hands that didn't quite stay still. He sat in the main meeting room off the entrance hall with 2 of Damien's people across the table and a folder of documents that he had clearly been carrying close to his body for some time, given the way the edges had softened. Isabella did not sit in on that meeting. She went to the kitchen, and she and Clara stood at the counter, and Clara made food that neither of them had asked for. The specific coping mechanism of a woman who had spent 11 years managing her nerves through the production of things that were useful. And they ate standing up without plating anything properly, and the morning moved through its hours with the specific slowness of time spent waiting for something to resolve. At 11:40, Damien came into the kitchen. He looked at Clara. "It's real." Clara pressed her hand flat against the counter. "All of it?" Isabella said. "Enough." He pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat down, which he had never done in this room, and the specific informality of it, the man who controlled an empire sitting in the kitchen while Clara's remedial cooking occupied the counter, landed differently than anything that had happened in the formal spaces of the house. Teller documented 2 years of Carver's financial infrastructure, account structures, ownership chains, shell company registrations. He also has communications, recorded, transcribed, that connect Carver directly to the people who moved on Marco. He folded his hands on the table. "With this, we don't have to fight Carver. We hand this to 2 different federal bodies and let them do it." Isabella looked at him. "That's not how you usually operate." "No," he said. "It isn't." "What changed?" He was quiet for a moment. "The calculation changed." He met her eyes. "Direct action against Carver keeps this going for another 2 years. It costs people. It costs—" He stopped. "The exposure isn't worth it when there's another way." She understood what he wasn't saying. She let him not say it. "What about Serena?" she said. "Serena gets what she was owed for the work," he said. "I settle her professionally. Whatever she was hoping for personally is not something I can give her, and she knows that now." "She'll be all right," Isabella said. It wasn't a question. She had seen the quality of Serena Vale's composure. The woman would survive. Women like that always did. "Yes," Damien said. "She'll be all right." Clara set a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. He looked at it, then at Clara, and something crossed his face that was close enough to gratitude that Clara turned immediately back to the counter as though she hadn't seen it. The afternoon was quiet in a way that felt earned. Isabella went to the garden. She did not go because she needed to work. The garden was in better shape than it had been since she arrived, the lavender along the east wall already showing the first signs of true establishment, the herb beds dense and fragrant in the thin autumn sun. She went because she needed to be outside, and she needed her hands in something real, and she needed, after the morning, to be in a space that she had made rather than inherited. She was sitting on the low stone wall along the south edge, not working, just sitting, when she heard his footsteps on the garden path. He stopped beside her, looked at the lavender along the east wall. "It's taking," he said. "It needed time," she said. "Lavender always does." He sat down on the wall beside her, not close, a foot of space between them, but present, deliberate, the specific choice of a man who was learning a new way to occupy space near another person. They sat for a while without speaking. The sun moved. The light changed. A bird worked in the rosemary. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "When I agreed to this arrangement, the marriage, I told myself it was purely strategic. Your father's situation created an opportunity to consolidate a relationship with certain regional land structures, and it made sense on paper." He looked at the east wall. That was true, and it was also not the whole truth. She turned to look at him. "I had seen you," he said, "before the arrangement was proposed. Once, briefly, at an event your father attended 2 years ago. You were—" He stopped, reassembled. "You were arguing with someone, a land agent who was being dishonest with a client. You knew he was being dishonest, and you said so directly in front of people without raising your voice." He paused. "I didn't know your name. I found it out later." Isabella felt the ground shift slightly under her feet, metaphorically. "You sought out the arrangement," she said slowly. "When the opportunity presented itself, when your father's situation became known to me, yes, I structured it." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that. I could have let someone else handle the debt. I didn't." She held very still. "Why are you telling me this now?" she said. "Because you asked me for real things," he said. "In the library. You said you wanted a real conversation." He looked back at the wall. "This is part of it." She sat with it. The discomfort of it, the odd reversed warmth of it, the complicated texture of learning that something you thought had been done to you had also, in a different way, been done because of you. "You could have introduced yourself," she said, "at that event." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for long enough that she understood the answer without him saying it, because that was not how he moved in the world, because the direct human thing had been the one avenue he had blocked off so long ago he no longer remembered it existed. "I'm introducing myself now," he said, "badly and late, and with considerably more context than is probably ideal." The ghost of something moved across his face. "But this is me. This is the actual version." She looked at him. At the jaw and the eyes and the hands flat on the stone wall, and the man who had watched her argue with a dishonest land agent and found out her name and used her father's ruin as the mechanism for an introduction because the direct route had simply not been available to him. It was not romantic. It was not a love story in any shape she would have drawn for herself. But it was real. "Damien," she said. "Yes." "The next time you want to talk to someone," she said, "consider just talking to them." He looked at her. The thing that crossed his face then was not the controlled flicker she had been learning to catch. It was full and unguarded and briefly, completely human, the expression of a man who has been handed something he did not know he was allowed to want. "I'll consider it," he said. She held his gaze. Then she reached over and put her hand over his where it rested on the stone wall. He looked down at her hand. He turned his over, slowly, and his fingers closed around hers, and they sat like that on the garden wall in the autumn afternoon, while the lavender moved in the light wind off the east fields, and the house rose behind them full of complicated history and the specific kind of quiet that belongs to things that have been through something real. She did not tell him she loved him. That word required more time, more steady ground, more mornings of coffee on the counter, accumulating into something she could name without qualification. She was honest enough with herself to know where she was and where she wasn't yet, but she sat with her hand in his and felt the particular relief of no longer pretending. The weeks that followed were not easy in the way that things in stories become easy once the crisis passes. Damien's work with Teller's documentation took 3 months to move through the channels it needed to move through. And during those months, there were tense days and guarded nights and moments when the weight of what is life was pressed through the walls of the estate and made the air inside difficult to breathe. She learned more than she wanted to about the world he operated in. She learned it the way you learn things that you'd rather not know, not in one revelation, but in accumulated small truths that built a picture she couldn't unsee. She stayed anyway. Not out of obligation and not out of the contract, which had long since dissolved into something unrecognizable, but out of the daily, renewable choice to remain present to the actual person she was learning. Damien, for his part, made choices she watched carefully and measured against each other. The ways he was trying to change and the ways he could not. The lines he drew differently now, and the lines that were too old and deep to move easily. They had the dinner he had promised. Then more dinners. Then a conversation in the library that lasted past midnight and ended not with resolution, but with both of them understanding that some things required many conversations, not one. He came to the garden sometimes without being invited and without explaining himself, and he sat on the wall and watched her work and occasionally said something useful about the plants, and she let him be there, and that was its own kind of progress. Nathan called once more, a month after everything had settled. She answered. She told him she was all right, genuinely, not as a management answer, but as the truth of where she actually was. He was quiet on the line for a while. "You're not coming back," he said, not accusing, just reading it. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said honestly, "but I'm not leaving, not right now." "He good to you?" She thought about the coffee, the garden wall, the hand closing around hers in the afternoon light, the man who had watched her argue with the land agent and found out her name and taken the long, broken sideways route towards something he didn't have a vocabulary for. "He's learning to be," she said. "And so am I." Nathan made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Isabella." "Thank you," she said, "for calling, for all of it." "You know where I am," he said. She did. Spring came to the Moretti estate in a way that Isabella felt personally. The herb garden reaching full density, the lavender along the east wall blooming for the first time in what Clara said had been at least 5 years, the smell of it coming through the open windows of the east wing in the mornings mixed with coffee and something that was almost, on the best days, beginning to feel like ordinary life. She called her father on a Tuesday afternoon from the garden wall. Thomas answered on the second ring. He sounded like himself, and the version she remembered from before the debt, before the years of diminishment. He was working the ranch again. He had taken on a part-time hand. The hayfields were in. "How are things?" he said. She looked at the lavender, at the house behind her, at the east wall her mother-in-law had planted and that she was learning, slowly, to tend. "Complicated," she said. "Good, both." "Both," Thomas repeated. "Both," she confirmed. She heard him exhale. "Your mother would have liked him," he said. Careful, tentative. "Maybe," she said. She would have made him explain himself about 17 times before she decided. Thomas laughed. The real laugh, the one she had grown up with. She held the phone against her ear and listened to it and felt the distance between Willowmere and the Moretti estate as something that had changed in quality. No longer the distance between who she had been and who she was being forced to become, but simply the distance between two places that both belonged to her life now. That evening, Damien was home before dark. He came through the back of the house. She heard the door, the specific sound of him moving through the kitchen, the brief exchange with Clara. And then he came out to the garden where she was finishing the last of the day's work, and he stood on the path with his jacket over his arm, the way he had the first time he had come to find her here. She looked up. "The lavender," he said. "I know." He looked at the east wall for a long time. The light was going gold across the stone, the way light went in the late afternoon in a place that faced correctly for it, and the lavender moved in it, blue-purple and fragrant, alive in a way that the estate had not been alive when she arrived. She would have... He stopped. "I know," Isabella said again, softer this time. He looked at her. In the gold light, with his jacket over his arm and whatever the day had cost him still visible in the set of his shoulders and the quiet around his eyes, he looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had recently, carefully, begun to set pieces of it down. "Come inside," he said. "Clara's made something." "In a minute." He nodded. He turned toward the house. He stopped. "Isabella." "Yes?" He stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at the door, and when he spoke, his voice had the specific quality she had come to recognize as Damien without the scaffolding. Stripped, direct, the words chosen because they were true and not because they managed anything. "I'm glad it was you," he said. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs, the dirt on them, the smell of the crushed lavender and the turned earth, and the specific scent of this garden that she had brought back from the edge of being lost. "Go inside," she said. "I'll be right there." He went inside. She stayed in the garden for another few minutes, alone, in the last of the light, looking at the east wall and the lavender and the rosemary her mother-in-law had planted and the thyme she had separated so it wouldn't be overtaken, and the beds along the south wall that had been dead when she arrived and were living now, genuinely living, rooted deep enough to survive what came next. She was not the same woman who had thrown up in a gas station bathroom off Route 9 and told herself it was nerves. She was not softer, not easier, not without her own sharp edges and the specific wariness of someone who has learned what it costs to walk into a world you weren't made for and make yourself belong to it anyway. But she was here, rooted, present to her own life in a way that the woman in the white dress, marching down that cathedral aisle with cold hands and a set jaw, had not quite been able to be yet. She brushed the dirt from her hands. She walked toward the light of the open door. Behind her, the lavender moved in the last of the evening air, fragrant and stubborn and entirely, quietly alive, and the east wall held the warmth of the sun long after the sun itself had gone, the way stone does when it has been standing long enough to know how to hold on to things. The door closed. The garden settled into dark, and in the house, for the first time in 8 years, there was the sound of 2 people eating dinner together in a kitchen with the windows open to the spring air, talking about nothing in particular, in the specific and ordinary way of people who have decided, against considerable odds and without any guarantee, to remain.